Hello, art people. The video that I bring you today is going to walk you through what will be the last major project of the year. It involves a concept that you already have done a little bit of research on, and that topic, that idea, is contrast. So, you will be making a picture that involves contrast. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see a picture that I have put together made up of my little bell and a collection of rocks. That is going to be the subject for my drawing. You will have to find your own subject for your artwork. The subjects that you choose should be real objects, like I've chosen real objects here. You shouldn't choose cartoons. You shouldn't choose another drawing or artwork as your subject. You're going to need to find objects that are around your house that you might be interested in making an artwork about. I don't have a specific number of items that you need to use, but you do just need to think about the completeness of the artwork and how it looks, how the layout and composition of your objects looks within the paper. That's important. You also need to choose objects that you really think are going to do well at illustrating the idea of contrast. In your research of what contrast is, many of you talked about how contrast can involve different art elements. One of those art elements was value. In my opinion, value contrast is the type of contrast that may have the most obvious impact on how well a drawing stands out and is visually interesting. Other types of contrast, like different sizes, different textures, are pretty important too, but I would say more so in terms of making the drawing more interesting and dynamic, and not so much in having the artwork stand out really well. For that, I think focusing on value contrast is really important. But for my subject, I did make sure to focus on a few different types of contrast. I definitely have value contrast, so darks and lights, and I also chose subjects that have different textures. Each of the rocks has a different surface look to it, as well as the shiny bell has its own surface quality and texture to it. To begin my drawing, I first started drawing and laying out the basic shapes of all of my subjects. In order to do that, I had to closely observe the different relationships between the different objects and where they are within the picture frame. So I look at where a rock is coming out of the picture frame and kind of compare where it is along the side. I compare how and where different rocks are overlapping with each other, and I compare sizes. I'm comparing lots of different things in terms of lines and shapes in order to get the layout of these objects as accurate as I can. Obviously, I try to draw lightly so that I can make corrections and adjustments, which I have to do often and which you would have to do often as well. Try to notice too that I began with very basic shapes and lines, and as those things started to take shape, I progressively got more detailed with the lines and shapes that I added to my subjects. You can also notice how I drew the full bottom curve of the bell. I did that temporarily to make sure that the curve of the bell looked right to me and that it followed through and ended up where it was supposed to go. Later in the drawing, I'm going to erase that. That's just one little trick to trying to make sure that I am being accurate with all of the lines. Even though the focus of this assignment is contrast, we're still concerned about things like improving our drawing skills and accuracy. I think it's important to note, and you guys might kind of make fun of me for this, but there's things about what I've drawn here that are not entirely accurate. If I really closely compare my drawing with the shapes that are in my resource image, there's things that are a little bit off. But I'm not going to struggle forever to try to get things perfectly accurate. I'm going to try to get things reasonably accurate and then kind of just fake the rest. If somebody were not able to see the resource image and they would look at my drawing and think that it looked accurate and believable, then I'm pretty happy with that. I want to be clear that what I'm saying doesn't make it sound like I don't want you to try to have it be accurate. I really do, but I just want to offer also a balanced perspective on the idea of perfectionism. We can strive to do something really well without falling into the trap of perfectionism. Okay, so I'm about 6 minutes into the video, which actually equals about 24 minutes of actual drawing time. That means it should probably take you longer in a lot of cases if you're striving to do a good job. By the way, this video is pulling double duty. It's a lesson demonstration, but it's also a happy early fry bump. Here's me throwing you a virtual fist bump. I'm just going to repeat myself and say that I began this drawing with larger, more basic shapes and tried to arrange them and map them out as accurately as I could first. Then I progressively drew smaller and smaller shapes and details until finally I'm doing some of the smallest details there are. Now I'm starting with the shading. I'm beginning with the darker areas that are present in my photograph. I'm not necessarily shading as dark as I want to, but I'm just starting to lay out and arrange the darker areas in my drawing. And I speak about this a lot, the idea of layering. So I start off with one layer, which is usually not fully developed yet, and it gets the process started, and then I go back in with other layers to either blend it better or to make it darker or sharpen up details or all of those things. Now that I'm done with the line drawing part, my focus for what I'm doing has shifted. The things that I'm paying attention to most now is comparing the different values that exist throughout the drawing and the different types of marks that make up that shading and those values. So I am constantly looking at which area is darker or lighter. Is it supposed to be smooth? Is it supposed to have a gradation? Is it supposed to have sharp edges? Should this area be darker than that area? I'm constantly running through these questions and looking at my resource image and my drawing at the same time to repeatedly answer that question for myself. If you look at the resource image and try to find the darkest, blackest values that you can in that resource image, then when you go to shade those areas, that should be pretty much the darkest you can make the pencil go. And then the background, which is just white paper, that would stay white when you shade, but everything that's slightly darker than the white of the paper has a shaded value to it, technically. Of course, as the artist, you get to decide how you interpret those values that you're seeing. When you're shading, you don't necessarily always have to make the shading be 100% accurate to the subject that you're drawing from. You use it as a guide, perhaps, but you're making judgments about how you can better make this artwork more effective and stand out better. And it's not always the way you see it in the resource image. Sometimes you have to exaggerate the contrast of certain spots to make them stand out better and be more visually appealing. Part of the reason why this is the case is because the resource image is in color, so they have colors to contrast against each other. But your drawing is only in black and white, so you only have values to contrast against each other. So sometimes you have to exaggerate the values in order to have your drawing carry the same level of contrast or more that your resource image has, because you're only working with black and white, whereas the picture has color to create contrast as well. Shading in layers also helps your shading look more pleasant. It helps it not to have as many unpleasant streaks or blemishes and marks in the shading. You don't always need to make your shading be perfectly smooth, especially when you're trying to create different types of textures. But you don't want marks and streaks and smudges that take away from the quality of what you're seeing from the resource image and your drawing. Obviously, you want the shading that you add to your drawing to add to the quality and the visual interest of your drawing and not be a distraction away from that quality. When you choose your objects that are going to be the subjects for your drawing, you don't have to choose a shiny reflective surface. I did because I wanted to show that difference and that contrast in textures, but you don't have to. However, if you choose to, because of the complex nature of something that is shiny and how difficult that would be to draw, if you do attempt that and strive to do a good job to draw something with a reflective shiny surface, then that might be a good way to get extra credit in the grading of this project. It would really show that you're trying to go above and beyond when doing this drawing. With a shiny reflective surface like this one, contrast becomes extremely important to draw this effectively. If I didn't have contrast, it'd be really hard to make out any of the details or shapes within the Bell's metal surface. It helps all those details stand out, and it helps sell the idea of the shiny reflective surface. Now, as I begin to shade the rocks that I've chosen as my subjects, I am considering different ways to apply my shading. I'm still concerned about contrast and value contrast, but I'm also going to be concerned about texture and how the textures of the rocks are different from each other and different from the bell. So I'm going to be applying different kinds of marks different lines, different directions for lines, different lengths of lines, as well as dark and light lines. I'm not as concerned about making smooth shading anymore. Now I want to show the appropriate shading and value with marks that really sell the fact that there's a different texture involved with the rock. That's part of why I chose rocks as my subject, and because I just like rocks. But I wanted to show that you can use combinations of different types of marks that go in certain directions and are certain lengths and certain darknesses and certain types in order to make each one of the rocks look a little bit different with concern to their surface texture and the colors and values that make up the designs and patterns that exist in the rocks. Subtle changes in darks and lights help show the roundness of these rocks too. And cast shadows from one rock to another rock that it's on top of show the spatial relationship between these different objects and make these objects appear to occupy this space a little bit more believably. When you're trying to create a realistic type texture, it's often not just adding one type of mark that's different to an object. But as you can see from me shading this rock right now, I've included different types of marks layered, there's that word again, layered, on top of each other. So I might have started with a certain type of mark as I shaded it and then moved on to other types of marks that I saw as being present in my resource image, and then layer even more little specks of darks throughout to create this depth of texture that's involved with the surface of the rock. One of the things that I hope you guys benefit from watching me do these video demonstrations is to see the whole process of building a drawing from start to finish. I've said it many times, but I'll continue to say it many more times, starting with basic shapes, progressively moving to smaller details, then applying values and textures, and then thinking about finishing touches. So I really just want you to see the development that takes place from start to finish, as well as how far you could potentially push the detail and development of a drawing. Drawings don't always have to be detailed, but I am trying to teach you to learn to push a drawing to its limits. So whatever look you're going for, try to push it to the next level. And in this case, I'm going for some accuracy and for some detail and for some textures. And so what I'm trying to show you is how far, hopefully, we can push this. And you could actually push it further than what you're seeing me do. This is what I have decided I was going to do with this drawing, but you could go even further with a level of detail and a level of finish and development. Just kind of depends on how much time and effort and shading you want to go through to make that happen. But I'm hoping that I can encourage you to push it a little bit further than what you may be used to pushing it. We don't want to just do an outline drawing. We don't want to do basic shading and basic details. We want to try to push it and see how far we can take those things. So as I move through shading the rocks, I'm also applying shading to the surface that the rocks are sitting on, the white piece of paper, and I'm indicating the fact that cast shadows appear on that surface. And like I said before, these cast shadows really help the objects appear to be really sitting on a surface and occupying space. It shows a more believable relationship with how these different objects are combined together. Alright, I'm coming towards the end of this video and showing you the development of my drawing. What you're going to be seeing me do is just adding finishing touches, comparing values together to see if certain places need to stand out a little bit more or if details need to be a little bit sharper. But before the video ends, I want to give you a little bit of extra information about what you should do. You should find a group of objects that you have easy access to in your house and that you can set up on a table and have be there for probably the next couple of weeks. You can work from these objects themselves if they're just sitting on the table, or you can take a picture of it and have an image, which is probably honestly a little bit easier because that image will stay the same all the time. That's what I did for this drawing, is I had an image on the computer that I was looking at as I drew this picture. Make sure that the objects you choose show contrast. They have to show value contrast, and they should also show some other form of contrast, so like texture or size differences, that kind of thing. You should think about how these objects are going to occupy the picture space. You're looking to create a pleasant looking composition. Don't just plant things right in the middle of the paper and call it good, but think about how they fill and use the space. Then you're going to need a piece of drawing paper that I hope you still have, that I have sent you. If you don't have one, then I need you to reach out to me and ask for more drawing paper. You need a pencil, and you might need a ruler. What I did was I measured a smaller space inside of the boundaries of the paper, which was 6 by 8. That was the size of the rectangle that I measured. And I did that because then my drawing wouldn't have to be so big, and I could make a smaller drawing, which would save me time, but I would still be able to make something of high quality. So I would say for you, you should also draw something of a similar size, 6 by 8 approximately. Not really smaller than that, but you could choose to make it bigger. That's your choice. Then start following the drawing process that I've shown you in this video. Start with the basic shapes, get that as accurate as you can, compare and examine where they go in the picture space, then move on to smaller details, and then finally apply shading and texture. That's going to be where you get the contrast from. And remember, contrast is the primary thing that we're focusing on with this art. But secondary to that, and still important, is improving and working on your overall drawing ability, which is involved in the idea of contrast as well. Okay, so if there's something that I have left out in my video demonstration, something that you feel is unclear about what I've said, or you're just unsure about something, please shoot me an email and I will try to make that clear for you, okay? Alright, good luck, and I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.